On a back channel with them.
And here we are. We're joining the DigPed group in PEI, and we're excited to meet some of the special guests today. We'll start with you, Autumn.
Hey guys, it's me, Autumn Keynes. I am privileged enough to be here on site at DigPed PEI, and I'm really excited to be able to learn a lot and have some great conversations. And yeah, I'll let the rest of you guys introduce yourselves. Stephanie, you want to go?
I'm Stephanie Loomis. I'm the party crasher, but I like crashing parties, so it's all good.
Go ahead.
I'm Jesse Stommel, and I was just trying to retweet the Virtually Connecting tweet announcing this. So I am a person here on site at Digital Pedagogy Lab at Prince Edward Island.
I'm Audrey Waters. I am also a human with a body and a mind. And sometimes I'm on the internet.
And we'll join with some of the virtual folks. Just take a turn and just your name and where you're hanging your hat in the world.
Helen, could you ask people? Could you call them out like one by one? That makes it a little bit easier for them.
Okay. Let's start with Rebecca.
Okay, I'm Rebecca Hogue, and in this space, I'm a virtual person, so I'm sort of I'm sort of human. And we go with that one.
You're not a virtual person.
And I'm in California, and I'm happy to be home after 2 weeks away. So really happy to be back in California.
Okay. Rajiv?
Hi, I'm Rajiv Jangiani. I'm a psychology professor at Kwantlen Polytechnic University here in Vancouver, BC. Really thrilled to see Audrey again. And,
it's good to see you.
Yeah, and Jesse as well. But I work in open ed mainly as an advocate and with the various open textbook groups.
Sorry?
Hi, I was just going to lurk, and now I'm actually on, and I didn't plan on that. So how do I lurk without, like, appearing?
Too late, you're here now.
I'm unhuman.
You're here now, you've got to join.
Hey!
Yay!
Yay, I'm at St. Norbert College.
Great to see you again, Lori.
Kristen.
Hey everybody, I'm Kristen Eshelman. I'm at Davidson College. I'm currently stuck in DC for a couple of days and almost didn't make it thanks to the Airbnb Wi-Fi. But I'm glad to be here. It's really good to see you again, Audrey.
Hi.
Donna?
Hey, I'm Donna Longclaw. I am just up the road from where Kristen should be if she weren't stuck in DC. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I'm good to be back in the DigPed hallway. I was here earlier this morning. And it's just great to see everybody. Hi.
And Colin.
Hi everyone, I'm Colin Madland. Just recently finished up at Thompson Rivers University and moving on as director of Trinity Western Online in the next couple weeks. Happy to be here.
And who have we got left? Carol and who's left?
I'm Carol Yeager, and I'm in Catskill, New York, and I'm supposed to be in PEI at the DIG conference, but this morning to the folks, medical meteor hit me and canceled at the very last minute. I'm delighted to be able to be on the
We're losing you, Carol.
and I'm missing you guys. And good food. Good food.
Maybe we could go to, who's that other person down?
Jameson.
Jameson.
Jameson, thank you.
Jameson, and wait for Carol to reestablish the connection.
I'm Jameson Miller. I'm a graduate student based in Williamsburg, Virginia, and anywhere else I can get.
Haha, yay! I have no proof of that.
It's nice to see you as a moving, like, real-time person, because I know we've interacted on Twitter a bunch, so that's always a treat.
And in the midst of all this humanity, we have digital issues and digital connectivity concerns. I understand there's lots of conversation about the digital, Audrey, after your keynote from yesterday.
Yay.
Jump in. Tell us what's going on.
Gosh, I'm not sure where to start. I mean, we were just in a discussion earlier talking about what it means to have students be online and to do their work online and do their work in public. And I think from my perspective, it's something that I advocate for greatly, but with that asterisk of caution, knowing that we have to be sort of realistic about what that looks like in terms of what happens to our data online, in terms of whether or not we can actually speak freely and comfortably, and even, you know, if it's, I don't really like the phrase safe space, but if online, and for whom online is or is not a safe space.
Yeah, I have heard Audrey speak, I don't know, probably a dozen times now, and every time I hear her speak, I come in thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to catch a Pokemon, I've got to like tweet, and I've got to do all the things, and I have to have all the technology, and then I watch her speak, and I go, oh, what I actually need to do is slow way down. And think critically about all of the work that I do. The interesting thing is, though, that at the end of every talk that I hear, it's about halfway through, I'm like, oh, so I shouldn't catch a Pokemon on Audrey's leg. But so the gist is, so I get this sort of sense in which I have to slow down and think critically, but by the end, I always feel mobilized to action. So I think that that's what we left feeling. I think we left feeling this sense in which we have to stop, slow down, think critically, but there isn't this sense in which you should just sit there and stay stuck in the mud. Instead, it's about what do you do next? Okay, now that we know this, now that we acknowledge this, what do we move towards? So it isn't this constant like skepticism that is pulling you back and keeping you from moving forward, but a productive, healthy skepticism that helps you move forward.
What he said. What about the virtual folks? Was anybody able to watch the keynote live? Does anybody have any questions?
Well, maybe I have a bit of a comment. Audrey, I mean, since Monsters of EdTech, I've been thinking a lot about what you say about the ideology embedded within tech and the platforms that we use. And you know, as Robin and I work more towards getting students to use non-disposable assignments, open pedagogy, and the like, I haven't really thought until what you were talking about yesterday as well in terms of the permanence. We frame it often in terms of something as desirable for students, performing or scaffolding them, performing public scholarship, and of course us at the same time. But whether it's desirable and whether it's possible and whether it's happening in a way that respects their rights now and in the future is something that your talk yesterday catalyzed my thinking about. So thank you for that. I don't have a concrete question yet, but I think I'm trying to think about how to integrate the concerns you raise with what I believe in terms of the value of open pedagogy.
I mean, I think this is, to me, like some of these interesting questions is oftentimes it's not an either or, right? It has to be, we have to talk about the both and, right? And so, I mean, there are things that we want, there are things that we want to be permanent, and there are things probably that are fleeting. And that's sort of the nature of learning. We don't necessarily need to have everything on the permanent record. But what happens, I think, too often, and well, pretty much all the time, is the students have no say in either of those, right? So the things that they might want to preserve, the meaningful work that they do, they can't actually necessarily retain. There's really not a mechanism for keeping these things, to have these things be extensible beyond the semester. And the things that they might not want to keep are somehow becoming the body of data of learning analytics, right? So do I really want to have a permanent record of how many times I showed up late to my Friday morning astronomy class? Please no, just let it slide. right? And so I think that that's like that we're facing the challenge of both the permanence and the sort of this notion that we're going to sort of heavily surveil students and that that's going to carry forward, and that's a profile that we're building that we're going to somehow assess whether or not they're going to be successful or not. So one is the work they're doing, and the other sort of like the work that we are gleaning from them.
I also think that so often that data that we're relying on so heavily increasingly is very low resolution. So if I look at Audrey and I look at her listening, how does it register? It registers through her posture, the hairs on her arm, the way that her eye twitches, the curve of her, the curve of her lip. It's extraordinarily high resolution. Her attention, her attention has so many signifiers. And yet, what do we do when we look at someone's attention in a learning management system? We try and look at, like, how many times did they look at each page? We look at data that's so resolution as to not tell us anything, because what were they doing when they looked at that page? We have no idea. And then on the other hand, we also try and reduce it to very traditional metrics, which mean very different things for very different people. So the curve of her lips might be very different than the curve of her lips. The sort of structure of their faces are different, and they emote in very different ways. So if I put some sort of standardized metric, like if your heartbeat is 61 to 72 while you're taking the test, then you must be experiencing anxiety. That doesn't actually work equally for each individual person. It reduces people to this extraordinarily machine-like self.
Quantified self.
Yeah.
You've had some conversations about the ownership of individual data and allowing students the responsibility of taking control. Is there some other conversations that have happened around domain of one own as an example, but other places where this is occurring?
I mean, I think that that's I think that that's the important piece of it too. Is it's a control over you can say your data, right? You can say it's a control over the work that you create in a class or outside of a class. A control over some control over the identity that you're putting online. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, what I'm really interested in is how do we have more control over learning, right? And so how do we develop institutions that don't simply have students be the objects of this system that happens to them? How do we give them a lot more agency, and how do we actually believe in them, sort of make responsible, respectful, intellectual decisions?
Yeah, and if I think about, like, what is this kind of action that we can take when we think about something like the philosophy that underpins domain of one's own, it doesn't necessarily have to mean building a website. It can also mean thinking, what if we take the philosophy underlying domain of one's own and think about the assignments we create for students, a sense in which we dictate exactly, here's what you need to do, here's where you need to do it, here's how you need to turn it in to me, as opposed to letting students inhabit and construct assignments. Or even just something as simple as, from a pedagogical perspective, I moved away from having students turn assignments into me, because I didn't want students to deliver assignments to me and then I receive them, mark them, score them, and give them back. So essentially I switched to students don't give their work to me anymore, I go to their work. So it's, in a sense, they create something and I have to go to it, as opposed to demanding that they deliver it to me.
There's another element to the domain of one's own piece that I'm not sure has been, I don't think I have this idea fully fleshed out, but of course it's a reference to Virginia Woolf, right? It's a reference to a room of one's own, the having a space in order to be able to write. And she was very clear that a woman needed a space, and I think 40 pounds a week or something, in order to be able to carve out the space and the economic security in order to be able to do her work. And I think that we have to really think about the lived experiences of our students, and do they have a room of one's own in that kind of way, with this sort of great economic precarity that I think many students live in. And so how are we helping them? And I don't think having your own having your own website isn't going to solve solve that. But I do think, how do we sort of talk about what we're doing in terms of social justice and economic justice, and recognize that we have to do better for the material lived existence of our students, not just these data points, and not just these words that they create, not just this content that we ask them to.
And recognize that our students are complex humans with identities. And so, for example, if Virginia Woolf is in some ways the precursor for Domain of One's Own, then when Audrey's talking about lived existence, I immediately think of the lived existence of women, which is something that Virginia Woolf was talking about. And I wonder if you or anybody could reflect on how that is inflected in the project for you, or how that's inflected in this work that you're describing.
I mean, I think that that's one of the challenges that I'm not sure that we've done a great job with internet and web technologies in general, is thinking about what does it mean to have the lived experience online that is embodied and gendered, right, in a certain way. And we could add to that, of course, like race and religious background and stuff. And so I think that, I do think that we need to think about, when we have a room of one's own, how are we actually constructing technologies in this case that recognize that it does have to be an amenable space to somebody other than this sort of white, male, middle class, North American, English speaking person that the internet seems to work quite well for.
I guess one of the sort of questions I wanted to ask, sort of following on that, is what I see with my students is they're afraid of the internet and they don't use it at all. Or they have professors that throw them, say, you have to blog for this course. And so then they end up with this crap content that's not particularly useful. But I guess, how do you get the students to a point where they are critically thinking about it but not afraid of it, so that they can actually start creating useful content for them on the internet?
Mm-hmm.
So do your students use social media at all? Or do they see that as like a separate thing from the student self? So right, there's the student self, and then there's the personal self that they have on Facebook or Instagram? Mm-hmm.
A lot of my students don't use social media. First day of class, I usually get the Twitters for sharing what you had for lunch comment.
Oh, wow. So, what kind of students do you have, Rebecca? Can you?
Master students. Master education, yeah.
Well, we did an activity today in the digital literacies track that I think is helpful in terms of giving students a way to critically look at, and Sean ran it, but it's Howard Rheingold, it's the crap detection, right? And so it's how do you make them go out and look at different, and I know you've used this in your class too. I actually have your page on Medium like bookmarked for that one, making them go out and who owns this technology, who's the CEO, what's their politics, and I mean, that really does, I think, start creating conversations, start creating discussions with students, and have them, start thinking about those kind of questions. I think you need to start with the questions and then drive that through the discussion.
How do we get students so that they can feel like they not only have the space, that we are sort of guarding the space for them, but that they always also have the choice to use it or not use it?
And I think that if we want our students to be comfortable with the internet, we need to think, as Audrey was saying, about the larger context of, are they comfortable at university? Are they comfortable in their course of study? This isn't just about Twitter scares me. This is about, I'm in your class and you're asking me to do something that I've never done before. It may or may not have anything to do with the internet. It might just have to do with, I've never done this before. What is this supposed to look like? I think we attribute a whole lot of stuff to digital that is just about unfamiliarity in a really human way, right? And you wouldn't want to throw them out into anything saying, okay, go do this, without some kind of scaffolding. That just doesn't seem kind.
And I think in particular, particularly pre-service teachers and the teaching profession in particular, and there are other professions like this, has always been under scrutiny for ways in which the professional and the personal should not mix, right? Teachers have historically not supposed to have had private lives, or they had to be very careful about the way in which their private lives were portrayed publicly. And so this is, I mean, it is connected to how one does that online, but it also has a long history of should you be married, should you not be married, right? Should you, where do you go to church? Do you, lots of questions about the public performance of being an educator that make it, that I do think make the stakes different for educators. They always have, yeah.
I wonder sometimes, too, for students, if it's a matter of, I've never done this without a rubric before, and so the expectation is, you're supposed to tell me what you want, and I'm supposed to give it to you. And when we give them freedom to be creative and go exploring, they don't know what to do with that, because that's really scary.
Has anyone ever run across a cultural bias or barrier for working online? And if so, how did you handle that?
Did you say lurking online or learning?
Working.
Neither, actually.
Working and learning. Work and learning.
I think I encounter that in every single class that I teach. I think every single one of my students has a different cultural context. And some institutions it's more sort of diverse than others, but every student is different, and every student has a different context. And I think when we start to say, the students at my institution X, the students at my institution Y, I think we immediately start to reduce to the notion of what a student is to this undifferentiated mass. And I think that happens so often and I think that it happens as well with teachers, as opposed to thinking about each one of them as a complex individual.
Thank you.
But the system doesn't want us to be complex.
No, because they can't measure.
This is human messiness, right? Human messiness is very difficult to grade. Human messiness is very difficult to scale. Rebecca was talking about the challenge of scale. We're not doing this in a vacuum. We're doing this in institutions that are talking about, well, how are you going to handle that with 300 students, and how are you going to handle it? So the balance, right, between the real world context in which we're trying to be human for our students and the systems around us that would rather we kind of be sort of less messily human because it's just a little difficult to deal with that. That's a hard needle to thread.
I'll add to the context of part of the reason I had mentioned a comment about scale based upon something that Jessie had said about looking for the student, as the instructor going after the student's content rather than the other way around. But the challenge is, as an adjunct, I only have so much time to teach so many classes, right, in order to make a living. And so I have to balance that with, and I think that that's something that I think in some ways the rhetoric around student-centeredness takes away from the reality of the instructor in the equation, because it is a two-way relationship in some ways.
So I agree. I think domain of one's own is really potentially very powerful as a pedagogical tool. But I'm wondering, as we're setting up this next Indie Ed Tech meetup sometime in the spring of next year, we started looking at how many colleges might be able to attend, and I think there are 30 to 31 domain of one's own campuses, and only one is a community college. And so I'm wondering about the responsibility of higher ed for folks who are doing this and are finding this to be very fruitful and beneficial and spreading the word, but getting that technology out to more campuses that don't look like ours. I'm curious, Audrey, what you think of that in particular.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's really interesting. I'm not surprised, but I would say that I would definitely love to see community colleges involved in so many more of the conversations that we have, because that is actually where most higher education students are, right? So we have these conversations as though most higher ed, like you'd think by the way in which headlines work, that most higher education students in the U.S. went to Harvard, right? If you look at the number of times the New York Times talks about Harvard, you'd think that they would enroll like, you know, what, 7 million undergrads or something.
But they do, don't
They could if they use their endowment. But no, I mean, and
if you count all the MOOC students, that is.
They only count for half, though.
But I think that the domain. I mean, I think that the domain piece is connected to things and to some of the blurring of boundaries around what institutionality looks like as well, right? And what your participation online looks like is a question, sort of a civic question and a public question, not simply public and private university, but there are questions around. I mean, I think, you know, questions around democracy. What does the digital look like in a democracy? And I think that we probably would get a lot farther with a lot of these questions if they were happening at places other than just elite private colleges.
And if we also didn't forget the institutional memory that's held at so many of those places. For example, I've been in so many conversations about online learning, and I was at CU Boulder back in the early 2000s, and they would have none of that conversation. It was like they were, the sentiment was that they were so far above, you know, we would never put our learning online. And meanwhile, that conversation was thriving in community colleges. And then the early, 2012 comes along, and all of a sudden, all of these elite institutions want to talk about online learning and want to sort of show their bona fides and expertise in online learning, and they literally look like they've time traveled 10 years into the past and stolen all the ideas of community colleges and then are selling them off as, you know, contemporary ideas. And you just kind of shake your head at that and go, why reinvent the wheel? And also, why not recognize the institutional memory of those places that have been doing that work for so long?
Well, so can I follow up on that? Because Jesse, you're at the institution that I think is probably doing the best job of building this domain of one's own. It's into your strategic plan. If I understand correctly, you've gotten the college to put it at that level. We certainly aren't there yet, and I think most schools who are working in domain of one's own are not there. How do you, I mean, for both of you really, how did you get there at UMW to get it at that high a strategic level? And then, you know, thinking, Audrey, I know you're going to track in August on action research. How do we start to measure what's happening at the level you're doing this, Jesse, so that we can make that case to more institutions across higher ed sector?
Gosh, that is a hard question. Let's create a conference where we talk about that. I think, how do you get that kind of thing in the strategic plan? You get, I mean, this project emerged from University of Mary Washington, and it emerged from the work of faculty members who were essentially working with student after student who were building site after site. I mean, ultimately, it is not philosophical at University of Mary Washington. This is people working every day, slaving and toiling over the project of education. And I think that's essentially what we do, is we turn to those people and recognize and honor their expertise and honor the work that they've been doing. I find that in my current role as a, you know, educational technologist, a director, an administrator, a thought leader, so, you know, all eyes are on what do I think about this? All eyes are on what does Audrey think about this? And I want to ask, what does Zack Whalen think about the University of Mary Washington, who teaches a 4-4 load and works with his students? What, you know, essentially I want to say, what has he learned and what can he bring to this conversation? I would say be the next step is turn to the teachers and trust the teachers to have this knowledge, essentially this wisdom, because they've been working for so long and working with so many students.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, one of the things that I think that universities need to do is build internal capacity better, rather than just any time a discussion of a new technology product or a new technology trend comes up, that they're really quick to outsource it to a third party. And I worry that that means that we're not developing sort of in-house expertise, and that expertise is scholarly, and that expertise is instructional, and that expertise includes students. Instead, I think we want to buy the solution, right? And so I think that domain of one's own is a great example of, you have to actually develop a certain amount of internal expertise. I mean, around people who know a little HTML and CSS, if nothing else. But you do have to then sort of work on some of the digital skills within your faculty, and you've made a commitment to develop those things rather than, again, make a commitment to purchase or license an LMS, and then perhaps you ask one person on campus to be responsible for administering that.
Yeah. The interesting thing is that domain of one's own is in the strategic plan. Canvas, the learning management system UMW uses, isn't in the strategic plan.
People have, if anyone has LMS in their strategic plan, I'm going to kick their ass.
Well, and the thing is, they don't, because it's been naturalized, I think, and I think that we need to question the way that it's been naturalized. And what's interesting is that, you know, domain of one's own, it's so amazing. You can probably guess which one has a higher ticket price, which one the institution invests more money in. And that's not to begrudge University of Mary Washington, because they are investing and supporting this project so much. But still, ultimately, more investment is going to these corporate platforms. And not just that one. Any institution, look around you. Look at how many corporate tools are we using?
Well, and the deals that we've made with, you know, edX, Coursera, whatever the rest of them are.
But Jessica, you've been in the rooms where the administrators say, what can we spend this chunk of money on? And the people who say, we can spend this chunk of money on shiny tech are usually listened to far more often than the people who say, we can spend this chunk of money on continuing professional development for people to do the work. It never happens that the person who's waving their arms around saying, we can invest in people, saves the day, because shiny magpie stuff is what drives policy.
Yeah. And actually, that's interesting that you bring that up, because I mean, I think that's the thing that University of Mary Washington has done so well, and they've spoken out about it. Before I got there, and this is part of the reason that I took the job at University of Mary Washington, is because they had invested so much in people. And it's not just they invest money in people. We need our institutions also to invest trust in people. They also need to invest care in people, and invest time in people. All of those things are just as important as the investing of financial resources.
But the money helps.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the fact that you have it in your strategic plan is a type of investment.
Right. Totally.
Can anybody tell me whether there's going to be a recording of Audrey's keynote? Because I would love to hear your voice and see your body language for that.
It's on.
Jesse brought up the body language earlier, but I definitely think that's really important in the keynote. I love reading it.
Who's that, Carol?
Pardon?
Carol, we're going to tweet the link right now.
Yeah, it's available.
It's available.
Yeah.
Okay.
It'll be on the DigitPed hashtag, right?
Okay.
I think it's also listed on the Virtually Connecting website.
You said 0 bad words. There is also a picture out there floating around the internet of her emoting in the background while I'm catching Pokemon in the foreground.
I see.
Which I did just to pester her. I don't actually really play Pokemon.
Oh yeah, Pokemon is here.
And also, I would love for somebody to define, aside from the digital of one's own at UMW, what you're referring to when you say digital of one's own.
Domain of one's own.
Domain of one's own. Essentially, it's the idea that University of Mary Washington in about 2011 launched an official initiative to give every student a domain of their own, and a domain that they could then, and they also funded that, and then gave them server space where they could ultimately put whatever it is. For the most part, they're putting WordPress sites, but the idea is that they can build anything in that space.
No, that I know, but what do you mean when you use domain of one's own in regards to other universities or colleges?
So other universities have been inspired to do similar projects, and there's, as Kristen was saying earlier, there's 31 different institutions currently that are doing some kind of domain of one's own project.
Okay. So
And each of them has a slightly different, I mean, they're not cookie cutter. It isn't a cookie cutter solution, which is one of the reasons I like it. Each of the institution, like Kristen's institution, is innovating and approaching it in her institution's own ways, in her own ways, in her faculty's own ways. The students are using it in different ways too.
Some universities have it associated with the writing center, right? So some of it is about sort of a more traditional sort of composition class online. So.
And I think institutions are at different, and I guess, so I want to use it in my class. I'm getting ready to teach in the fall, and I want to use it with my students, right? So I don't know if I'd say my institution is using it, but I mean, that's sort of like my way of sort of, hey, let's look what I'm doing kind of thing, right? So, and I think that's the reason why it has to be, or that's the reason why it's in the strategic plan and the LMS isn't, right? Because it's messy, because everybody's doing it a little bit differently, and so you need to think about, okay, how does it fit in here? Whereas, I mean, I bought an LMS, right? I've run an LMS for like 8 years, and it's like a, you go and you pick your LMS box off the top shelf, right? And like you take it home and there's instructions and you put it together, right? I mean, you don't. That doesn't need to be in the strategic plan.
Better not be.
Thank you. Sorry I used digital, not domain. I meant to say domain.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm actually curious, Kristen, could you speak to that a little bit? Talk maybe about how it's inflected differently at your institution?
Yeah, it started at ours, like I think it started at others, around an alternative to e-portfolios. So that was, gosh, this is going back a number of years now. 4 or 5 years ago when Cornell came out with that report about e-portfolios and how there just really wasn't a good solution out there for this. And we started to take a hard look at whether or not we wanted this kind of portfolio work, which is, for Davidson students, is really a space for reflection. Do we want that to be something that serves the institution, or do we want that to be something that serves the students? And so we took the, I think, appropriate track of saying we don't care what the institution wants, it's not about that. And so we went with domain. We were looking at things like DreamHost and Bluehost and GoDaddy and other services before Reclaim came out. So we had already been thinking along these lines, and then when they came out, it was perfect. So we just slotted right in. But the way we're doing it now is we are implementing it through classrooms, because I think, to Donna's point, you have to have some scaffolding. I tend to be of the philosophy that you just throw people into difficult, productive discomfort situations, and I think that's better learning, but I've also found it's been really frustrating for a lot of students. So we do it through the classroom, but when we come in, we very publicly kick the faculty member out of the classroom. They're all part of this performance, and then we have a really hard conversation with the students about what this is, what this means, how they can own it, and how it has nothing to do with Davidson. So we're funding it, and that's it. Other than us funding it, it is really completely theirs to own and manage. So portfolio, Jesse, that was the strategy initially, but I think it's moved into a different focus on digital dexterity, on agency, and on how they can begin to integrate the 4-year experience starting in their freshman year.
Yeah, I get really kind of itchy. My skin itches a little whenever I hear people talk about portfolios and they immediately talk about building them in order to assess them. And I'm all, that completely misses the point. And I actually have a quote I wanted to read. This is from Deborah Schleif, who is one of the faculty at University of Mary Washington. She actually wrote a piece that responded to the Virginia Woolf connection and domain of one's own. And she writes, how do we create systems that don't disempower the tautology this choice might evoke? This gives the student the power to choose to remain online, to curtain one's online presence or not after graduation, a choice to keep one's domain, to change it significantly, or not to use it at all. And then this is the bit that I think is interesting. She says, bear in mind the not inconsequential fact that teaching students this might negatively impact the way our institutional evaluators assess the success of domain of one's own. So essentially, if we build it right, it will be impossible to assess it in the way, using any current metric that we have.
And we all know how important the number counting is when it comes to building infrastructure or building tech places for students. The number counters do take over.
Well, we're coming up on about 45 minutes. How are we feeling?
Can I ask you guys a completely unrelated question? How's PEI? What's the most exciting thing you've found or discovered in PEI? Because I know most of you have never been there before.
Anne of Green Gables. I don't think you can answer the question. I mean, you said weather.
I said the weather. But wait,
Anne of Green Gables.
could not have asked for better weather. And escaping Atlanta and coming here was awfully nice.
Did you get a chance to go swimming?
Not yet.
No.
Okay, because like one side of the island is nice and warm, the other side.
Although I
not much.
sort of feel like I swam right in a lovely musical at Anne of Green Gables. Like I felt like I was immersed in everything that's good in the world.
Okay, I'll jump in with kind of a wrap-up question for you guys. You were talking about memory machines and who controls our memories will control our future. What memories will you take away from DigPed PEI?
Oh, that's a nice
question.
Oh.
Me?
Spoken like a teacher. Let's reflect.
So, I mean, for me, one of the things that I find, I feel so fortunate with the work I get to do. And I feel like I have so many friends all over the world, but it's always really special to me to get to hang out face-to-face with people. It's great to have follow-up conversations, right? And like remember the last time that I saw, like the last time I saw Rajiv, we were in Sun City. But being here with everyone is great, particularly Sean.
She loves me more.
Yeah, I think I mean, it really is a privilege to be in the flesh with people in real time, right? And that's a big reason why we do virtually connecting, because we know that you guys don't get that, and we want to give you a glimpse of it, you know, and it's the best that we can do. So yeah, I mean, the connections we met, virtual hugs, absolutely. Getting to see Audrey present live. I've seen her present over a live stream before, and followed a Twitter stream when she was talking and that kind of thing. But being able to watch it live is always.
And then to sit by her.
Do you know, interestingly, as I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about this idea, and I don't know if I really believe this, but I'm going to put it out there, that skepticism lives really well online, and it reads really well online, but optimism doesn't travel nearly as well. And so it's interesting that when I'm in a space with these people, they're like all of the work that we do feels in a really important way.
Yeah. I think it also verifies and validates that these relationships that we form in these virtual spaces are real.
Yeah.
As I walked in and Stephanie, hey, I know you. It's like we've never met, but so you actually feel like it really does validate the experience that online friendships and relationships are real.
Yeah, that's why I don't like in real life. I don't like that term or IRL, right?
Yeah.
Because it is real.
In the flesh.
That's what
I don't hug every human being when I first see them. Like I don't go around saying, "Oh, it's nice to meet you," hug. But I hugged her the first time that I saw her a couple days ago because I felt like I knew her already, and so that's really kind of lovely to feel. To sort of feel the hug's great, but also just to recognize that that's possible.
Yeah. So we'll hug all of you when we're all physically in the same space.
Thank you. Any final thoughts from the virtual group of what they've learned from conversations in DigPed, and we can let the in real life people head off.
That would be so much, Ellen.
I'm just going to say thanks for making the virtually connecting available. I mean, it's absolutely fabulous. And as I said earlier, the Google Plus Hangout certainly works a lot better than when I used it about 4 or 5 years ago. It has improved quite a bit.
It has improved.
And it's great that you folks take the time from the schedule, because I know it's really tough when you're at a conference, interacting with other people, to take the time not only from the focus of your presenting and working with other people, but also connecting and networking with other people. So thank you all very much.
And I'll just tell you, I'll just be really honest and frank. You know, at the end of a long day like this, 15 minutes before this started, I was kind of dreading it. It was like, oh, I have to go, oh, I have to do more today. The second I saw all of your faces on that screen, it like changed instantly. Like I saw your, and I was like, oh yay, hey, I get to hang out with friends. Like it's actually, you sort of forget that this is exactly what I want to do after a day like today, is just hang out with friends.
No, thanks to everybody.
So thank you. Yes, thank you very much for taking the time.
Meet with us.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, guys.
The folks in the virtual room, we can stay in chat for a bit longer yet. Oh, Ravi, you almost popped in. Anyway, yeah, we can hang out. We're still live, but I'll just close the broadcast. Any final thoughts from the conversation before we stop the broadcast? Colin, you didn't get much of a chance to jump in today. Oh, okay. You gotta get going. Bye.